We're going through the OSHA requirements for the introduction to OSHA as we are salting the content with other things like Lauren's leadership point of view and some other things we've talked about. I know that you saw this slide with the guy standing in the bucket. We talked about it. The reason that was a citation was not because of the fire or the danger of where he was being burned or something. It was that he couldn't get safely in and out. We talked about machine guards. We talked then a little bit about unlabeled chemicals, and we stopped there. What do you remember about unlabeled chemicals in a jar or a bottle or something like that?
You said the Cafe Rio, right? Was it Cafe Rio?
Yeah, we talked about that with the sugar and the caustic soda problem that they had. A lot of times at our workplaces, we need little chemicals that do certain things that are part of a process. Maybe an adhesive, maybe a solvent, maybe a cleaning agent, something like that. And we buy it in 55-gallon drums, and it's not appropriate to drag the drum over to your workstation because everybody needs a drum, and so we put it in bottles, and a lot of times it'll wind up. I thought there'd be a water bottle up there. There isn't, but this is kind of like a water bottle. We got empty containers in the trash, and so that's perfect. It's got a spout on the top of it. It's just exactly what I need at the workstation. So I fill this up with a chemical, but what it says right now is this is a hand sanitizer. So if I think it's a hand sanitizer and you put acid in it, I'm going to get injured because it's not properly labeled. So we take the label off or we cross it out. Well, now it's still not properly labeled because it doesn't say what it is. And so OSHA says we have to have a label of some sort on everything so that we know what it is, so people don't accidentally use the wrong substance in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there's an exception to that is an exception that makes it okay. I've noticed Melissa she's got a bottle in front of her, doesn't have a label on it. That doesn't have a label on it, I don't think so. Do you have a label on that bottle? No. Nope, it's an unlabeled bottle. So it might be a chemical. It might be a pina colada. I don't know what's in it. That could be some clear liquid. Might be water. We don't know. And it's totally okay. OSHA says you can do that, but you can't let that out of your sight. That's your bottle. And as long as you have control of your bottle, it's okay. Lockout tagout is the same thing, same set of rules. This is your plug that energizes your portable saw. You don't have to have that locked out and tagged out if you control the end of the cord. As long as you control the end of the cord, you can have that saw, no lockout, tag out, knowing that if it's energized, you could get hurt, right? So you're in control of energizing it. So as long as I've got control, but if the end of that plug goes out the door and around the corner where I can't see it, I no longer have control of that plug. So this saw needs to be locked out, tagged out, because I don't know who's going to energize it and when they might energize it. So I might be working on changing blades. I got my finger on the trigger when somebody plugs it in, and lo and behold, I got an industrial accident on my hands. So OSHA will have reasonable rules like that. So with chemicals, reasonable rule is you can have unmarked bottles, but they've got to stay in your possession, which is a problem when you go to the bathroom. If you leave it at your work site and OSHA sees that, they'll write you up on that. That's not okay. Many places have personal lockers. And if when you go for the day or when you're going off shift, whatever, if you take your little bottle and put it in your locker and your company understands why you're doing it, you're not stealing it. You're not taking it home. You are putting it where somebody else, you are avoiding the need to label it. Otherwise, you need to empty that bottle, put it back in the barrel, or if that's not appropriate to do, and on a lot of chemicals, that's not appropriate to do for contamination and other reasons, you then would have to dispose of it or label it. I mean, it's a simple thing. You can put a proper label on it, but a lot of workplaces have unlabeled stuff. I see that in laboratories all the time. I see it in, you know, you have a bottle with a little kind of, it's got a squirt of some sort of oil in it because it, you know, makes things slides better. You've got a little chemical release agent that you spray on it, makes it unstick better. You've got a little something that polishes it. You got 3-4 bottles right in front of you at your workstation, and you need them, and you should have them, and OSHA wants you to have them as long as somebody can't get confused with what it is and get hurt. And that's the whole intention or purpose of that. What are we depicting here?
Holy smokes.
That's a gas cylinder that went through that. That's a concrete floor. Gas storage cylinder. It was cryogenic. It was oxygen. Ruptured its bottom, jetted upward through the ceiling and into the room above. Gas discharge also blew out the walls of the lab where the tank was stored. All right, so cylinders are powerful, and OSHA cares about how we take care of our cylinders. If you've got a cylinder of any kind at any place in your facility, that cylinder must at all times be taken care of per OSHA rules and regulations. Certain types of gases can't be stored close to each other. Oxygen and acetylene are two examples of that. If you have, and we do oxyacetylene cutting and welding, right? And so if you've got oxygen stash and acetylene stash, they can't be stashed in the same place. They have to be separated with a concrete block wall, as a matter of fact. And they have to be so many feet apart, as a matter of fact. And so if we don't do that, we need to look up what OSHA requires and change our ways, because OSHA will write us up for that one. If we have a cylinder that is not being used at the moment, has to have a cylinder cap on the top of it. That's OSHA rule. And if it doesn't have a cylinder cap on it, they will write us up because they are worried that if you knock the valve off of that tank, like it falls over,
It's a rocket.
it becomes a rocket. And most people haven't had a chance to see that. I'll show you in time a couple of videos where the Mythbusters guys do it. You know, they do cool stuff back in the day.
There's also videos of accidents on YouTube where it's happened.
Are there?
Yep.
I have to look up a few. I at one point in time worked for Air Products and Chemicals, and we were into bulk oxygen and nitrogen were our two biggest products. By bulk, we sold right to steel mills and oil refineries and different places that used large amounts of those gases. But we also had a vast inventory of cylinders that were full of those gases plus exotic gases of all kinds, span gases for laboratory chromatography and that kind of stuff. So at a steel mill, a typical steel mill, we get the contract for the bulk gas that they had, and then we'd also get the contract for all the welding gases, the tank, the cylinders. And we normally, the customer never buys a cylinder. In most cases, you rent the cylinder, you pay demurrage charge on a cylinder for every day you have it. It's not a lot of money, it's pennies or $1 or something for short periods of time that you pay for that cylinder. But it means that the company is responsible for the cylinder in terms of maintaining, pressure testing it, and making sure the cylinder's integrity is good, the valves are good, and all that stuff. But every once a year, I had to go into the steel mills that were my accounts, and we had to take a team in and we had to audit the number of cylinders. Our tax accountants required us to do that. So we had to go find all the cylinders that were in that facility. And steel mill facilities are enormous, several miles long and, wide and all that. And so you're out there for a week hunting cylinders. And I recall seeing firsthand what most people haven't seen, there was a rack set up that had kind of like a motorcycle rack is really what it most looked like. It had a bottom thing on it, and then these angle bars on it, and then a top thing on it, and it was out on the beach of Lake Michigan, on steel mill property, and there were other things there, but it was on sand. It was on the beach, more or less. And I asked what that was for. Hey, watch this. They showed me what it's for. They took some of our cylinders, put them upside down on the rack, took a sledgehammer and knocked the valve off of them and shot them out into Lake Michigan. And it was cool. It was way cool. But they were our cylinders. So my boss was not happy about it at all. Required me to get some photographs of them doing that, which we did. And that it didn't change their ways. They still did it, but they paid for them. So it gave us the ability to charge them for lost cylinders. So instead of arguing about saying, we lost that cylinder, we don't know where it's at, so we'd write it off. Since we knew they were firing them out into the lake, there was no write-offs anymore. We got to charge it for it.
Nowadays, the tree huggers would have a fit.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's not. It's stupid in all kinds of reasons.
Oh, yeah.
You're polluting the lake, and they don't go, what we found is they don't go straight. They sometimes went pretty straight, but often they would whip around. I never saw one come back at them, but I didn't see enough to know if it had ever happened.
Well, danger number one, you're smashing the head off with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. What if
that thing tips over or something? And
Yeah. But they had great fun doing that, and gas cylinders, they are like a rocket when they go. You've got a few thousand pounds pressure in a cylinder, and that cylinder takes off, and away it goes, and it can go through stuff if somebody's in the way. It can be fatal. So managing our cylinders, we may only have 2 cylinders in the plant because they're just, the shop uses them for occasional welding. Treat them right. OSHA will write them up. That's too easy for them. If a cylinder's not in a spot where it is protected from falling over, and if the cap is not on it, OSHA is required to write us up for that. So we don't want to do that. What's wrong with this picture?
he's grinding fiery sparks onto a metal workbench for starters. He's got trip hazards all over him, some of them flammable. That picture of Marilyn Monroe is probably flammable.
It probably is. That probably also is against HR as well.
Oh, is this an actual business?
Uh-huh.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Yeah, that's an actual business.
That checkerboard or whatever you want to call it, where his tools are hanging, that's made out of wood.
Flammable, yeah.
Everything around is flammable, pretty much.
Everything around is flammable. It's a mess. There's combustible stuff everywhere. There's stuff on the floor. Like you said, tripping hazards.
He's using a cutting wheel without a face shield or gloves.
Yeah, equipment's not being used properly. There's a question about whether that workspace is even an appropriate workspace. You've got a pole that's in the way that kind of restricts motion. OSHA would debate whether that was okay or not. We don't know what this is down there. Is that open or just something that he's working on? It's unknown exactly what all the violations are of that, but you would know the name of that shop if I told you what it was.
No way.
It's here in St. George. And so the first thing we do to get away from that is we 5S our workplace, right? That's a lean process of where we organize it, we put stuff in its place. We have combustibles around. We do dangerous things. We have processes that produce sparks and flames. That's all okay. We can't see in this photograph, but if you're producing any kinds of sparks or flame, you have to have a fire watch that's watching your back to make sure your own clothes don't catch on fire behind you, especially if you've got a welding helmet on. You can't see, and somebody's got to watch your back and make sure you're not on fire before it's too late. I mean, eventually we figure it out, but the idea is to figure it out before it's too late. So the ideas of 5S and a clean workspace send volumes to the OSHA inspector when they walk in. If they see something that's cluttered up, you're inviting them to get picky and to really take a look. But if they walk in and see something that is squeaky clean, well then right away they're believing you got your act together. You take care, you are safe, you handle things the way that you're supposed to handle things. And that is a message that we want to see. That obviously is a problem. The only thing that I was accompanying an OSHA guy when that photograph was taken, and the only thing that got them off the hook was some guy thought real fast and said, well, if you look at that fire extinguisher, it's expired, so we locked it up so nobody would accidentally use it. I go, okay. And
Sure.
the OSHA guy laughed and said, "You're good as long as I can find a fire extinguisher that's not expired."
At every checkpoint, every door.
Yeah, he looked, and they were deficient, by the way. They had more that were expired that weren't, and they had some that were exactly what and where they were supposed to be. They had some that were remounted that you couldn't take off the wall. Somebody had screwed them to the wall so hard that you couldn't remove them, couldn't use them, and it was like, this is a textbook on what not to do with fire control or fire management or fire hazard. And what was really, I thought, an indictment about that, this was a small town in Washington County. The fire marshal had been there and had not picked up the violations. He picked up some other things, some
Cup of coffee, maybe.
but maybe, but he did not find all that stuff. We talked about an eye wash station before. We were just looking at cleanliness at that point in time. It's really tempting for any horizontal surface in any workplace to become a shelf. And because we don't usually have enough places to put stuff. And so we wind up, improvising and making shelves out of stuff. That we never use that for an eye wash station because nobody ever gets hurt, so we'll just put some stuff in there temporarily. And if somebody does need an eye wash station, we can clean it out, right? OSHA says no.
Makes a great paint washing station, though.
It would. Yeah, it really would. Clean your air gun out or whatever is done. That's just not okay. And that one's really a bit ridiculous. We're not expecting to find that in our workspaces, but you'd be surprised what you do. This was not a photograph that I took. I kifed that from what appears to be another country, and it's amazing what people do when you look at some of the photographs that you find online. That was not a staged photograph. Some people seem to have no fear and are pretty sure they can get it rigged up and get it in place, but I see all kinds of that's not okay. I'm not going to go out there without fall protection myself. I'm probably not going to go out there at all. Probably not even with fall protection because I don't like heights and I'm not adventuresome that way. And I've got to hold my own weight up, which is enough that takes a substantial amount of strength these days. And so, that kid can probably hold himself up with one arm. I can't when I'm going. This is one that we have often in a workplace where we're building we're expanding, we're putting a storage building in the back. Wilson tore down the tennis courts at one point in time and built a warehouse there, right? And so we had crews that were on site doing the underground, and in some cases those holes are shallow, in some cases they're deep, depends on what's being done on the site. But they're jobs that don't get started and done in a day. And what that means is the crew goes home. And when the crew goes home, it may be private property, but it's still open to the neighborhood. And kids, when I was a kid, you'd go. That urban exploration gene is in all kids, and they go look, and they're going to climb down in the hole and see what's down there. And OSHA says that is not okay. You must guard, block off, fence off, limit access to anything that's hazardous like that. Where, I mean, if nothing else, there could be snakes down there, right? It doesn't have to be that there's leaking gas or an atmosphere that they can't breathe, or which all of those things are possible. And it's not up to us to just go, well, hey, it's private property, it shouldn't be there. That doesn't matter. Your private property in your backyard, you can put a swimming pool there. The city's usually okay with that in most neighborhoods. But the law in Utah is you got to put a fence around that swimming pool. Why? Because the kids are going to go there. And you've got to make it so that they have to work at it to get in. It's got to be blocked to the casual person. They're not going to wander. A 3-year-old tot is not going to wander into your pool. And they're probably not going to scale the fence. And so older kids will scale the fence. But And that's on our private property in our house. A commercial property has a lot more rules associated with it regarding safety of construction that's going on. Even if you are contracting to somebody else to do that work, they do have a responsibility to guard that job site. But in a lawsuit, it's gonna come back to the owner of the property, which is you, if it's your company. And so, you have to make sure that that is being vigorously protected and done. There's a respirator that probably hasn't ever been used. Well, it probably has. It was probably used on the first day. And then the employee said, I can't wear this 8 hours. And so they hang it up and did their painting anyway. We all know the story there. There's a lot of stuff in the air that should not be breathed and put into your lungs. And there's some surprises of that. I recall spraying polyurethane on concrete one time when I was in college. It was a side job. I got paid a lot to go into an empty warehouse and, blow all the dust off the rafters and paint the concrete floor. And that was a cool job for a kid until the next morning after I had spent the weekend doing that, I couldn't open my eyes. And I had some eye protection, but it wasn't adequate. I had polyurethane, the contacts to my eyeball, and I had to go to the doctor and the hospital, and have them figure out how to get my contacts pried off of my cornea. And that was not a fun scenario. Why? Because there's enough sticky urethane in the air from a sprayer that it's not only you're breathing, and I had a respirator on, but it was also contacting my eyes. And I had safety glasses, but not goggles, right? So I had the wrong PPE for that task. And they're not playing when they tell you what the right PPE is. There's reasons for that, right? And so we want to enforce whatever the rules are regarding breathing protection in the environment that we are in. Almost all safety devices can be bypassed. This is a little beauty switch right here that bypasses it. You just clip it in and it's all good. Our forklift, the interlock on the seat that says you have to be sitting in the seat on the college's forklift here, that interlock is bypassed half the time when I go to use a forklift or something.
Well, those ones are pain.
Yeah, they're a pain, but I'm heavy enough to engage it. So if it doesn't start when I sit on that thing, I know that the interlock is there. But for light people, that's a problem, and so bypassing is a temptation because the forklift stops running if they bounce.
Well, if you try to look at what you're doing,
it shuts off the forklift. I agree that they're a pain, but it's against the law to bypass it. And I lost 2 fingers from an interlock that was bypassed. These 2 right here were cut off. I've told you that story before. Fortunately, they were sewed back on, and it's all good now. But it wasn't at the time, and it was my right hand, so it caused a little bit of rehab to get that figured out. And it all was because somebody bypassed the switch and I didn't know it. And had I known that the safety interlock was not functioning, I would have behaved differently. But it's still not okay. You can't just say it and then tell somebody. You have to take the piece of equipment out of operation. And bypassing safety devices of any kind is never okay. This is a ridiculous example. We have a lot less ridiculous examples in a lot of places where we need to have the discipline to just let everybody know we're going to do this right. I'm not barking at you if it's wrong or you did it to speed things up or whatever. It's just we're not going to do that. The culture that we have here is that it's okay to take an extra second if that's what's required to get it done safely or get it done right, correctly. And that includes respecting and recognizing all of the safety devices. Now, we're welcome to take 2 kegs of beer and put a little something on top of them and jack the truck up in the air while you work on the front suspension or that front transfer case or whatever it is that you're working on there. That is perfectly fine from OSHA's point of view if that is your driveway and you have no employee.
That's just natural selection at that point.
That's, it's a Darwin Awards at work right there. That's exactly what that is. That is obviously a ridiculous exception. I stole that photograph also. I didn't take it. My neighborhood won't let you even work on a vehicle in the driveway. That's not for OSHA reasons. That's for snootiness reasons. But in this case, the message is simply this. OSHA does not care what you do at home. And everybody needs to understand it. You are welcome to be unsafe at home. Everybody is welcome to be unsafe at home. And everybody, on occasions, is unsafe at home. We all do take chances or do stuff that, we take that extra reach to, change the battery on the smoke detector that's beeping in the middle of the night because we didn't want to get dressed and go down and get the right ladder. So we're on the wrong ladder, the one that was in the house. And we're barefooted, and we're reaching further than we should, and we could tip that ladder over, and we know that, and we're kind of ready, for that to happen. But you can't do that at work, and that's the message we want everybody to understand: is that you are welcome to do all kinds of stupid stuff at home if you are inclined to do that. You want to blow the microwave up? Go for it. You're welcome to do that, but don't blow the microwave up at work because there's other employees there. Your stupidity or my stupidity is risking your life, or yours is risking my life, or injury. And that's what OSHA says. We don't want you to do that. We talked about gas cylinders becoming rockets. They also do rupture, or they can rupture. When they rupture, you'll notice on this photograph, there is a piece of missing steel there. That piece of missing steel became a piece of ammo, and it fired across somewhere, and I don't know if that hit somebody or didn't hit somebody. That one also has the valve gone on the neck, on the top of that photo, and that photo was taken after the rupture, obviously after the rupture occurred, but not in the place of where the rupture occurred. So I don't know what collateral damage was done. That hole in the concrete block did not come from that rupture. It came probably from another one. I don't know. I have gone into workplaces. I went into a machine shop in Ogden. So Utah machine shop, a big, large operation, an aerospace company, but they make machine parts. And they've had a series over the years of industrial accidents in their workplace. And they tended to memorialize every one. So if there was a hole in the wall like that, they'd put a frame around that hole and write up a story that said exactly what happened there and what machine it came from. And one of the stories that I recall seeing was a piece of a woman's scalp in the wall with hair still coming off of it. And she had got her hair caught in a spindle, and it had ripped her skin off, and then the hair, some had broken, and it slung her, the skin, against the wall. And that had happened some years before. She lived, but she was partially scalped at work on the machine that was still there. And that story that was on the wall pointed at that machine, gave the date of what had happened, had her picture, and it was really, I want to say touching. It was not in a good way, in a bad way. And it was shocking to the point where you go, holy crap, that happened in this room here to somebody that worked here. They were just clocked in doing their job. And they weren't even at the top of the pay scale. They were at the bottom of the pay scale. And they got hurt. That's not okay. That shouldn't have happened. Let's make sure it doesn't happen to me. That was kind of the message that was preserved by that company. This one is a real photograph. The guy that did that used to work here. That was in his garage at home. It was a pretty nice paint booth. And he was painting, he'd really gone to an effort to make circulation, to plastic it off so that the air dust wasn't in the air and all that stuff. And he was painting an Acura, a silver Acura, I believe was what he was painting, when his wife came out into the garage and said, "The kitchen is on fire." because these fumes that were being pulled out of the paint booth were highly volatile fumes. And when they came in contact with the gas stove in the kitchen, which was on the other side of that wall, it blew up, and his house caught on fire. Didn't burn the house down. He lives off of an area called Shadow Mountain in St. George. Didn't burn the house down, but it caused a pretty good fire, and it was not worth it. You know, you can rent a spray booth, a real one, you know, at an automotive collision place. They'll charge you a few $100 an hour to use it, but it's better than burning your kitchen up. So homemade stuff isn't, I mean, he did that at home, not for a living, so OSHA didn't get involved. The EPA didn't get involved. The fire department didn't get involved other than to put the fire out. But if that had been at work, I've seen the same thing. I've seen the same kind of thing. Plastic at Andrus Transportation's truck repair place, where guys, you know, spraying a little collision damage on the front bumper of a truck. And that's not okay in that circumstances. It wasn't an EPA sanctioned type of a setup. That was enough years ago. They've had different management there at the moment. I don't think they would do the same thing today. I don't know that for 100%, but I don't think so. All right. Let's see where we're at time-wise. OSHA stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. As you know, it's part of the United States Department of Labor. Responsibility of OSHA is to make the workplace as safe as they possibly can by the employers for the workers, and to preemptively impact our health long term. So not have us going to work in an environment where we are breathing or exposed to radiation or something long term that is going to hurt us, like the coal miners that are protected by MSHA that go down into mines and breathe black coal dust all day, and 20 years from now they die of, you know, lung cancer or black lung disease is what it's called by the coal mine community. That's not okay. And so there has to be a way that the employer can send somebody to work without them being hurt. Nixon signed this into law in 1970. It became effective in 1971, a few months later, from December 29th to the end of April, 3 months later, and ever since, it's still the law. It gets added to every now and then. Now, there are a couple of things about OSHA. OSHA at first was pushed back on by certain states that said, this is too much federal jurisdiction on our state. And we don't want the government messing with our stuff in our state. We want to be independent. And so this went back and forth to Congress a few times. And ultimately, what became the law was that every state has the right to accept federal OSHA or reject federal OSHA. At the moment, 23 states reject federal OSHA. Utah is one of them. Currently. Now what that means is, so if we reject federal OSHA, that doesn't mean we don't have to have laws, we don't have to have rules. It's our laws and rules must be every word, every paragraph, every sentence, every period, everything exactly that the federals require, except it's simply adjudicated by our state employees. So the state of Utah has mobilized its own version of OSHA. Its office is on State Street in Salt Lake, and they have to adopt every word of that OSHA manual that I showed you. Now the states are allowed to add to them. So you can be your own OSHA, state by state by state, as long as you do all of OSHA, at least. And like California adds to OSHA. There's rules in California that aren't anywhere else because it's California. They're stricter. Some say more ridiculous, more expensive, really hard to operate in California because they add rules. They have the right to do that. At minimum, they have to accept all of OSHA's rules in order to play. Now, what that means is it's a good thing because all of the dollars that would be spent proportionately in a place the size of Utah, we don't trust the feds to bring that money back to Utah. If it's tax assessed, operating expenses for the Department of OSHA in Washington D.C., we believe they'll spend some of that in Washington and not here. So while it costs money to administer an agency, all of that money is allocated to the state of Utah and spent in the state of Utah. So our OSHA here abides by federal OSHA, but it's local people that live in Utah, and it's an office that's here in Utah. And so all of the expenditure that should be spent in the state of Utah is spent in the state of Utah because we get the funds allocated federally to our state. And about half the states in the union do it that way. So we're still fine to call it federal OSHA because it's their rules. And federal OSHA can get involved if they don't believe the state requirements are adequate. And an example of that occurred just recently in our history. Certain states said, you do not have to get a COVID vaccination. Utah was one of those states. And the feds said, hold on. What you're saying is you're allowing an employer to allow somebody come to work who is unprotected and can expose others to COVID-19. We don't think that's the spirit of OSHA, and we want to intervene and require it. Right? So this was what was brewing back and forth during COVID, where the federal OSHA was saying, your state OSHA is not strong enough to protect the workers. And the truth is, none of us knew the answer to that, right? There was a big controversy over COVID. None of us ever been there before. And by the time this started to spin into litigation, COVID was gone. So it's not an issue now. We're not fighting over that. The feds have backed off, and each state was mounting that. A whole bunch of states attorneys gathered together and filed against the federal OSHA rules, and it was brewing to be a question of human rights versus protection, and it didn't have a clear answer either way, honestly, from at least from my point of view. But it also didn't have to come to an end because the pandemic resolved prior to us arm wrestling over that one. But each state has the opportunity to enforce the federal rules like we do here in the state of Utah. OSHA does not cover everybody. Yes and no. We've got a worker, Harry Adams. He's a miner at Below Ground Incorporated. Is Harry Adams covered by OSHA?
No.
Yes.
No.
The answer is no. Why?
They have their own underground.
Underground. The answer is no, because MSHA is who covers him. Good job. Those of you that were on to that old trick question. Okay, so here's another one, not so trick. Adrian Smith, one of 3 employees of ABC Landscaping.
Yes.
Adrian is a yes. Adrian, boy or girl, I guess that one can be either. The next one, Taylor Dell, an accountant in business for herself.
No.
No, because in business for yourself, you don't have any employees. And some accounting firms, depending on the way they're set up, aren't covered or required under OSHA. And that has to do with some technicalities on how people are paid. 1099 or W-2. Rob Jones, one of 10 carpenters working for Woody.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. He's covered under OSHA. Company has to participate with OSHA.
I have a question.
Yep.
Are like police officers and like firefighters, are they like OSHA? Are they have to do OSHA requirements?
Yes, depends on the state in terms of how that is enforced and what is considered allowable by them.
Yeah.
If I've got my laptop bolted to the dash of my car and I'm driving, the cops can write me up. If they've got their laptop on their dash and they're driving, they can't write themselves up. They don't. That's legal for them to do. That's not an OSHA violation. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why the rules are different. Well, I should back off for a second. I see a lot of reason why rules have to be different for law enforcement. You know, they're in very, very difficult situations sometimes.
So if a police officer were to get killed in line of duty, would that be a OSHA fatality? Like
Mhm.
that they would have to report?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is. For law enforcement, there's an awful lot of state by state, city by city insurances and help, you know, for that, because, you know, that's public safety is the title of what they are, really, is, you know, is to help us have safer communities to live in. But, you know, and firemen, fire people, I don't know what the right term is.
Firefighters, firemen.
Firefighters, there we go, firefighters. You know, they're not in a safe work environment. You know, OSHA requirement is that the employer has to provide a safe work environment. Well, there's some caveats to that. As safe as it can possibly be, as free from hazards as it can possibly be. Firefighters are not required to go into a burning building without the proper PPE. They're not required to, you know, make brazen, you know, moves of superhuman things. Many choose to do it anyway, but they're not required to do that. And so if a firefighter turned around and said, this building just got hit by 2 airplanes in 911, I'm not going up there. They would have the right to do that. They would be challenged later, like there's a lawsuit right now with a police officer in that Florida school that got shot up, and they're charging him with not rushing in. And you know, that's an OSHA hazard question. You know, should he have? Should he not have? Was that his true, not just duty, but, you know, was that a mandate that he go into the line of fire? I don't know. That's in a court right now. We'll see how that turns out. And that's not under federal OSHA. That's under the state of Florida jurisdiction to determine that. But that's going to be a precedent case. That's going to set, you know, how much risk am I required to take in my job?
Yeah.
You know, and for the most part, those are extreme cases. I'm not in law enforcement. I'm a teacher. So how much can, you know, can Dixie Tech require me to do that would be dangerous? You know, they have to accommodate me if my knee gets blown out and I can't stand and teach. You know, they have to make reasonable accommodation for me to sit and teach. You know, stuff like that we would expect. But you know, if there's live machine gun fire going through the building, I'm not expected to stand here and, you know,
Wait.
yeah, keep teaching. You know, you're being paid to teach. But these questions are good questions, and we'll bring some more of them up at certain points, because it's always safe for us to say, yeah, what's the safe way to do it? And OSHA's mission is to prevent injuries, protect the health of America's workers. And one of the things that they do is they help us learn how to do job safety analyses, to look at the hazards that are in our workplace, and to help us figure out how do we make those hazards less hazardous. You know, they told Wilson, you got to put machine guards on your drill presses, right? You know, but their intentions were good, and so they maintain record keeping so that companies can't hide injuries from their employees. So if I am working in a hostile work environment where people are getting hurt, the company can't lie to me and say, oh, that's just, you know, buck it up. Nobody's done that. Nobody's falling. Nobody's dying. Nobody's getting injured here, when in fact they are. OSHA keeps the records, and I have access to those records. You do too. We can look and see what kind of injuries have occurred at our workplace, so we can look at what illnesses have been reported, what job-related injuries are occurring at Wilson Electronics or whatever company that we are working for, and we can check it out. Air Force and military have the same equivalents. They'll comply with everything that OSHA requires. You know, this is just taken from the Air Force standard, sentence by sentence. We don't need to read every sentence in that, but that's just to say that the military has their own standard. Some law enforcement agencies have their standards too. Most often, I've seen it with federal marshals and the state equivalents of those. They have a written policy that is very, very similar to what is here. I don't know if they teach it at front level like they're supposed to any longer. We have some examples of marshal agencies here in southern Utah that have gotten some exposure and some negative press because they didn't necessarily couldn't prove what level of training and what level of compliance to the federal requirements they were compliant with. So, questions for review. Why was OSHA necessary?
To avoid injury.
Yeah, companies were not watching the backs of their employees. What is OSHA's mission?
Save
Sa-
lives.
Same thing, to save lives. And why is our training important?
To help.
We become eyes and ears for OSHA, don't we? You know, in our workplace, OSHA does not have enough people to inspect the businesses in southern Utah. So they expect us to help them, to make our workplace a safer place, to add our conscience to the mission that they have. Here is a list from that poster. I showed you that poster on the first day. This is a list from that poster that says what our rights are. We have the right to. Let's read one bullet at a time, go all the way around the room. We'll start with you, Tino.
A safe and helpful workplace.
Know about hazardous chemicals.
Information about injuries and illness in your workplace.
Complaint and request hazard correction from employer.
Training.
Back to
Hazard exposure and medical records.
File a complaint with OSHA.
Participate in an OSHA inspection.
Be free from retaliation from exercising safety and health risks.
Okay, I didn't word these, OSHA worded these, but a couple of those are worded kind of weird. You have the right to hazard exposure and medical records. No, you don't have the right to hazard exposure. You have the right to know what the hazard exposure is. And if people in your workplace have been exposed to hazards that they weren't supposed to, you have the right to know about that from medical records. And you have the right to know what your medical records say about you. You have the right to be trained. And this is where a lot of companies actually they call OSHA because they say, my company's not training me adequately. I want to be safe, but I don't feel safe because the company won't provide training. And that's a violation. That's not okay. OSHA will heavily recommend that company involve themselves in some training. Now, the bad news of that requirement is, I think I said this once before, OSHA does not require that the training is good training. That's up to our conscience to provide. Don't do it if it's not good training. You know, do the best we can do. You know, sometimes super training is super expensive. And so sometimes we can't do the very best training we could think of because it's too expensive to do. It's not practical from a business point of view. So we can go through that thought process, but we have to give the level of training that is the best and most practical for what our company can do and can deliver. It's interesting that we all have the right to file a complaint with OSHA, and then we have a right not to be punished for doing that. This one is hard for a company to not do and for you to prove that they didn't.
Can you file a complaint with OSHA but keep your name
Anonymous.
anonymous?
Two answers to that. One answer is yes and the other answer is no. They say you can. But understand, somewhere in the course of that investigation, it is likely that a boss that wants to can figure out who it was. And, you know, because there's 3 people in your department, you know, and they've heard you say this before, and so they know it's you, you know, kind of thing. But that's against the spirit of the rule. The spirit of the law is that you should be able to report to OSHA anonymously, and they will try to allow you to report anonymously. But if they get far enough into it, I mean, give you an example outside of an OSHA reporting. Sexual harassment. Sexual harassment reporting requires Dixie Tech here to have a phone number and a name of somebody anybody can call anonymously and report a sexual harassment incident. And the college is required to keep it that way. But follow this through for a second. If that becomes charges,
They gotta know who
you're going to court to testify.
Yeah.
You know, so it ultimately may not stay anonymous. Now, our courts are pretty good for sexual harassment of protecting the people that have been raped or the people that have been harassed. Our courts are pretty good at that. But at some point in time, you still are gonna have to be bold and step up a little bit if you're filing a complaint. And so I'd advise you to think it through and not file it, just to think it through of how you're going to document and handle what you are doing, so that the boss eventually, if it comes out, the boss will see that your intention was golden. Your intention was to get a better workplace, a safer workplace. Your intention wasn't to throw the company under the bus and just hassle them. Because we can do that sometimes. You can file a noise complaint against your neighbor, and when they weren't making any noise at all, you can claim whatever you want to claim and file the charge. But that's harassment. And if you're caught doing that, that's an harassment charge. And OSHA doesn't want you doing that to the company either. But they're going to think you might be doing it to harass the company because you're mad at them.
Yeah.
And so if you document carefully that on this day you went through proper channels, nothing happened. On this day you gave them information, no response. And you show that the company has not been responsive to your request, OSHA's going to be all over that. And they'll try to protect you in that. They'll try to find someone else that's been treated the same way in the company. And then that becomes something of a class action. Company can't defend on that very easily. And it is against the law for them to spank you for ratting them out. Now,
Spank
a lot of them,
fire?
well, yeah, you're not supposed to be able to get fired.
Okay.
But if they fire you for some other cause, you're not bulletproof. So be careful of that one. That's what I'm saying. On both sides of it, you're trying to ask a
Yes, I
question.
have a question though. In those cases, we know whatever happened, most likely the company has a fine and maybe close the company, whatever. It depends on the injury or the situation. But those people who make the accident and they have a consequence, like for example, if somebody it wasn't put attention and forklift they drove over somebody and they injure or kill somebody, that person has any consequence of what happens, or just everything goes to just to the company issues. You know what I mean? It's
Could
like
they fire that person for like running?
well,
someone
besides the
over?
fire, because I don't think it's fair for the company get all the fines, even he goes to business and this guy just like, oh, it was an accident. Because I'm saying this because this weekend I was by Santa Clara, I think it's Harmon's. It's a store across the street. They had tools. I remember the name of the store. But I was there. I have a gift card, and I tried to spend a gift card. I had like $50, and I said like, well, I don't know what to get. And I was walking in the store, and me and my wife, I talk about OSHA, the class, and I kind of make some comments. And she told me, "You see that guy? It was a guy with a little foolish car. It was on the floor. He was driving to the store. But he was walking with his phone and he was. And my wife said, "He's talking about your class. Look at this guy." And I saw it like far away, and she said, "This guy maybe had an accident." 15 minutes later, he just run over the stuff that was sitting there. And he break a couple things, And I was like, my wife's right. It's only 15 minutes after she told me. He just run over some stuff that was for sale right there. But luckily it was some items. It wasn't about somebody.
A kid, yeah.
And this is like, and he was like, oh, and he even noticed that like everything breaks and said, oh, the machine just go, but he wasn't his phone all the time.
Yeah.
He just kind of working. And I think it's not fair for the store to be fined, like he had somebody, and because he was negligent to his job.
Well, it's not, in those cases, it's not up to the store or to OSHA. There's gonna be two sides of that event. One is gonna be the legal side with OSHA and the company, and they will be involved in making a decision what they do about it. But there's gonna be a civil lawsuit about it also. So the family that was injured, or that sustained a fatality or whatever, their lawyers are gonna go after everybody. And they will sue the operator, they will sue the company. The company may protect the operator if they can, or provide legal counsel to help the operator, depends on the nature of the accident. But in almost all cases, those matters are gonna be out of our hands. Those are gonna be handled by a lawyer who can file suit on anything. And then it'll be up to the
But
court.
most likely be the company or the.
Well, when it comes to vehicular accidents, there's an awful lot of case history in the courts in every state where a pizza delivery driver has hit somebody and they've gone after Domino's. You know, and in fact, Domino's changed they had a challenge out there, deliver in 30 minutes or it's free. I don't know if you remember that. That was some years ago. That was a race challenge.
Yeah.
And after a few drivers hit somebody, injured them, property damage or personal damage, and said, well, my boss told me to get it there in 30 minutes or we were gonna eat it. You know, or I was gonna have to pay for it. So when the courts heard that, they go, Domino's, you're wrong here. You can't challenge your drivers to break the law or else, you know, as a performance scenario. So they changed their rule at the precedence, but there's a lot of cases of those where a driver is on business and they have an accident and both the business and the individual driver are challenged by the court, you know, are charged. And the police are not gonna charge the company. If you run a red light and hit somebody and kill somebody, well, even if you're in the company truck, the cops are gonna cite you personally. And so based on that citation that the cops gave you, you know, their lawyers, the injured people lawyers are gonna eat you alive. You know, they're gonna, but they're also gonna go after your company. They're gonna go, and usually, the long answer to what you were asking there, usually the cost of litigation and, you know, the lawyers and the trial and all that is so high that the attorneys know they can't collect from an individual. But the company's got a lot of money, so they'll go after the company and they'll leave the individual alone. In essence, they won't leave you alone. They will go to the maximum of whatever insurance you have. So if you have uninsured driver's insurance and you're uninsured, or, you know, whatever your personal liability, if you have a liability policy on your house, you know, if you got a $1 million, $2 million liability in a rider on your homeowner's insurance, the lawyers will find out, and then they'll sue you for that amount. And knowing that it's not coming out of your pocket because you don't have that kind of money. You were driving a pizza delivery car. You're not a wealthy person probably, so they're not going to waste their time trying to collect from you, except for whatever your insurance is. And that's whether that's right or wrong. It's kind of how it works, you know. And they biopsy your insurance right away, see what you got, and then they'll go after that if it's enough for them to justify it. Because if you don't have much insurance, if you have $200,000 insurance, and a lawyer's gonna, you know, split the payout, that means they're only gonna get $100,000, and they can burn up $100,000 in fees at $500 an hour. They can burn that up real quick. So they may look at it and say, it's gonna cost me more than I can collect from that insurance company, so I won't go after them. Now that's flat out ethically wrong, but that's our system, the way it works, really. Or at least I think that's ethically wrong. All other countries don't have it that way. So this is a list of stuff that are our rights, and we should understand that. As an employer, we need to understand that our employees do have the right to call OSHA. They do have the right to be free from retaliation for whatever they have tried to do just to make it a healthier or a safer workplace. Your best bet as a boss, if you have awareness that somebody is uncomfortable with a risk or a hazard somewhere in their workplace, work with them. Don't oppose them. Work with them, you know, and pull the team together and try to respond to their concerns, because if you do, they probably won't call OSHA. If they see you're doing everything to be honest and upfront and transparent with them and make it a safe place for everybody, most employees aren't going to get upset about that. All right, I'm watching our time frame here. I think it's 5:41. I think we'll cut out of this in a second. I'll come back to this poster. I want to go to this. We have the right to know about hazardous chemicals. And they call that the right to know. OSHA has actually, for the most part, updated that philosophy. They haven't followed through with all the documentation, but they want us to know what their intentions are at this point. It's not just that we have a right to know. OSHA says you have a right to understand. And knowing and understanding are close, but they're not the same. I can know that the company uses sulfuric acid. And I can know that's what's in that tank. But OSHA says you have not only the right to know that that's what that is, you have a right to understand what sulfuric acid is about. How much of your body can be exposed to sulfuric acid? What happens if you pour it on your hand? What happens if you breathe it? What happens if it gets in your eyes? You have the right to understand everything that should be known about that chemical that's in your workspace. And so having a right to know and having a right to understand really are two separate things. And so OSHA has spent a fair amount of time working on what this is called. Back in the day, we called it an MSDS. And that is no longer the case. The law changed the name of it to an SDS. This was called a Material Safety and Data Sheet, is what MSDS stood for. But they dropped the word material off of it because whatever it is, it's a safety data sheet. It doesn't have to be a material. It could be a different type of substance. And so they have standardized what these sheets say. Used to be a company could go, yeah, we got one. It's 2 pages long. Here. And the government kept noticing that they were inadequate. And so they standardized what is a safety data sheet, and they have documented a format that provides the same kind of information in the same kind of place. So what I want you to do, we are going to talk about the SDS because that's something that is really hard for us as a company, as companies to stay ahead of. Our vendors are coming out with new stuff all the time. And you know, for an example, Tide, the detergent, is a Procter & Gamble product. It's a chemical. So we can wash our clothes with it. But how many times in your lifetime has there been a new Tide? The current pod's 80% more detergent than the old ones, right? They're advertising that. I don't know what that means, but they're advertising it. Is it all the same kit? Well, they have a new version. And everyone smells different. And so they're new chemical compounds. They're new chemical concoctions. Every time there is a new chemical concoction, we are required to have a new SDS on file so that our employees can be aware of what that chemical is. And that's a hard thing to stay ahead of because we're constantly getting new varieties and new chemicals, and we're trying new stuff. We develop new processes, and each of those processes may have an SDS associated with it. And it's the law that we have to have those SDSs, and we have to have them available to workers. Which brings an interesting question sometimes in some OSHA inspections I found in my limited travels. We used to have them all in hard copy, so we had a big old binder somewhere that had all the SDSs in them, and you could look them up. And now most companies provide their SDS electronically, and so you can have a data file somewhere that has all your SDSs in it, which is fine. OSHA allows that. However, that data file has to be accessible to every employee, which means the night crew needs a password to your system, right? Or to wherever the SDSs are at. So the point is, it can't be something that's in somebody's office. It can't be something that the night people don't have access to. Only day people do because they ask somebody and they have to log on. So we have to set it up so that every employee has access to that electronic file. They don't have to have access to our bank account or our credit card numbers or any of that stuff. They have to have access to the SDS file from whatever password level they are at. So we have to have training that supplies that. Where we are headed with SDS files, and some jurisdictions have this much more capably than others, but where we're headed is that my SDS file here on this campus shows all the chemicals that we have, and it has them in some priority if we have vast volumes of certain ones. Let's say, for example, the ice cream factory at Dairy Farmers of America, DFA, down there in the industrial park. They have vast quantities of ammonia, 180,000, 200,000 pounds of ammonia, which is explosive. It expands 16 to 1 as it moves from liquid to gas, which means if we release a little ammonia here in this room, it drives all the oxygen out of the room. It means it's unsafe. Now, we use ammonia to fertilize on my farm. We put it in the ground. We handle it. It's in containers. But in their setting, they're using it for refrigeration. And so if there's an event of any kind of a fire or any kind of a hazardous event that occurs at the DFA headquarters, there's at risk a huge amount of ammonia that shouldn't be released. It shouldn't be, it could kill people. We don't want it, we want it to be safe. So as the fire department approaches our building, there's more and more of a standard broadcast, a Bluetooth type signal that's going out to the fire truck. As the emergency responders gets to the property, they are then informed the location and a list of all the chemicals that we have on hand on our property. So if there's a fire, they know where the ammonia is at, they know what the substances are that we have and what kind of volume. We're not there quite yet in terms of having all fire departments interfaced with all companies. In fact, in our county, most fire departments are not interfaced with any of our companies. But that's state of the art, that's where we're headed. And that's a good thing. What I want us to do is we're going to talk about the SDS and how to read it. We'll look at an example SDS and walk our way through it. But I want to leave this as a bit of a homework assignment for Wednesday's class. I have up here 8 SDSs, safety data sheets. I want you each to take one, and the homework assignment is to review the one you have taken. When we come back to class on Wednesday, we are going to go through the 16 required sections in the SDS, and you are going to talk about your product. We're going to go section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4, section 5, and go back around, and you will talk about your chemical in that section, kind of what it says about it. The chemicals are, I have an SDS for Miracle Grow plant fertilizer. Scott sells it at Home Depot and Lowe's. Windex, the grocery store sells that. Water, Costco sells a lot of that. Drano, the grocery stores sell. Gasoline, Maverick sells. Salt, everybody sells salt. Clorox, cleaning material everybody has at home. And acetone, fingernail polish remover, that most households have at least a small supply of. So I want you on your way out, we're going to be done with class right now, and so as you go out, pick one of those that you're going to take with you, review the 16 sections, at least scan them, and then we're going to go through those 16 sections and see how it relates to those various chemicals. These are everyday chemicals that we use or have. I remember my wife had a Miracle Grow plant food in a 1 gallon jug, right? Like the milk jug, like we all had, that she watered the plants with. And at the time, I had a baby in the house. She also mixed the baby formula with a jug of distilled water, right? Those two jugs were on top of the refrigerator side by side. Unlabeled things. She makes a bottle of formula for James, my son, with Miracle Grow plant food in it. Realized her mistake called me at work. I was in the middle of a conference meeting with doctors. And the secretary came in and said, there's a phone call for you and it says it's urgent that you take it. So I took the call in the conference room and she told me what had happened. And I said, well, call poison control. I don't know if it's a problem or not. And there's a number for poison control on all of these, right? We have a number for poison control. Turns out, by the way, you can feed your kid plant food. It didn't kill him, and he grew. So, it worked, I guess, you can say that. But you wouldn't want to drink a lot of it, as you'll see if you take that one. So we're done with class. Thank you. I will see you Wednesday. Thank Lauren for coming in and sharing with us. That was good. I appreciated that. I think everybody else did as well. Take one of those, and I will see you at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. Thank you.
I'm gonna grab an Elisa one.
Yeah, would you? That'd be great.
Yeah.
Is this the water one? Oh, this one is.
Give them acetone.
Yeah, what that was. Gasoline, Windex, salt, other salt.
Would you grass?
Drano.
I'm just grass.
Drano, that's a good one right there.
Like, salt, how bad salt was.
Why do you have to have an SDA for water?
You don't. OSHA says you have to have them for all hazardous materials. Water is not classified as a hazardous material, except for you can waterboard somebody and kill them by too much water.
Okay.
And so most of the water suppliers voluntarily produce one anyway, but they do not have to. It's good. All the rest of them, you have to.
This is gonna be an easy one.
That should be, yeah, because it should be okay. There's not too many ways for it to be fatal unless you breathe it or take too much of it.
Yeah.
So I do it with the towel.
I was interested to know that. That's why I picked that
When I
one.
was younger,
Yeah,
I don't know,
yeah.
When you get older, you can't hold your breath that long. 'cause you're like,